Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another Oceans, Forests, Streams video. Today I'm going to be designing a Venus flytrap terrarium, probably the most popular carnivorous plant that is locally found in the swamps of North and South Carolina. We are going to utilize the same cloche base that was used in the last two videos and only modify it a little bit. Due to the mature size of the plants, we are going to be able to downsize from the large cloche to the smallest cloche at only 12 inches high. The first thing that you're going to need to find is a container for the plants. I recommend some form of terracotta pot, something that allows water to easily pass into the soil. Because these plants are bog plants, they like to have their feet wet all the time. I was lucky to find this 11-inch clear floating candle display online, and instead of using it for floating candles, I'm going to use it to hold the reverse osmosis deionized water for the Venus flytraps. For those of you that are unaware, this is what a compressed brick of coconut fiber looks like before hydrated. You can find this at any nursery or greenhouse, and this is going to be half of the product used for the substrate for the Venus flytraps. The other half of the substrate for the Venus flytraps is simply just going to be coarse sand. That's going to allow a little bit of aeration into the roots, but also maintain any moisture if the water level drops too low. To make the clay substrate for the side of the pot, you are going to need some form of potting soil, or what I like to use is reptile soil, and some form of dehydrated clay. And of course, you're going to need a terrarium or cloche. For being a plant that I didn't speak too highly of, the moot moss has made its return again, but unlike the two tropical terrariums that I previously made, Venus flytraps require a dormancy period, so I plan on putting this terrarium in the winter into dormancy, which should help the moss live in the long run. Of course, you're going to also need to pick up the star of the terrarium. Luckily, most nurseries and greenhouses in the United States and Canada carry these wonderful little plants. Before we get into the main construction portion of this terrarium build, we're going to need to soak the terracotta or ceramic base for a couple hours. What this is doing is preparing the clay for the clay substrate that we're going to be putting on the outside. If we applied the substrate now, the clay is actually so dry it would draw so much moisture out of the substrate that it would cause cracking and potentially flaking off of the pot. Because we have a couple hours while the pot hydrates, it's a good idea to also hydrate the cocoa fiber. All this requires is breaking up this block into some smaller pieces, putting them into a container, and covering them with either distilled water or reverse osmosis deionized water. It's a good idea to break the pieces up into really small pieces. That will help the hydration process go a lot faster. I also think it's a good idea to add all those small little crumblies that ended up on the table. After the cocoa fiber has been sitting in water for a few minutes, it's a good idea to get in there and start breaking up those larger pieces so they hydrate evenly. While we have the pot and the cocoa fiber hydrating, it's a good idea to also start hydrating that heat-treated clay. This isn't fired clay. All it is clay that has been collected from outside and then put in the oven at about 300 degrees to kill any bacteria and pathogens. Just like the cocoa fiber, get in there with your hands and break up any of those dry portions of clay to make sure that everything is evenly hydrated. After your clay has been hydrating for an hour or so, you are ready to either add your potting soil or reptile mix into the clay. You're going to want to get your hands in there and really mix it up into the consistency of thick cement. If you're like me, you're going to find it easier to use a silicone spatula to push the clay on the side of the pot. You know, I actually found this process to be rather enjoyable. It was like you're frosting a really dirty clay cake. But there was something quite therapeutic about it. After you are done cleaning up the inevitable mess that you made while applying the clay substrate to the outside of your pot, it is then going to be time to make the main substrate base for your Venus flytraps. This is going to require 1 part coarse sand to the 1 part rehydrated cocoa fiber. And just like the clay substrate, you are going to want to get your hands in there and mix this very thoroughly. Now all we have to do is let the clay substrate dry overnight before we plant. It should take about 12 hours for the clay on the outside to dry down just enough so it can be worked without falling off the pot or transferring onto your hands. This part isn't completely necessary, as you'll see a little bit further on in the video, but I did want to add some extra moss mix to the outside of the pot just to help expedite the growth of moss on the vessel. I do think this terrarium is going to take the record for the easiest layout. It's as simple as putting the moss on top of the substrate and planting the fly traps directly into the moss. I am going to reserve the sphagnum moss that was used to wrap around the plug of the Venus flytrap roots, just to expedite the moss growing process at the bottom of the pot. I do think the sphagnum moss is still alive and will green up with adequate light and humidity. So please just enjoy the rest of watching the planting. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching this video. If you felt like you learned something, feel free to hit the thumbs up, the subscribe button, and ring that notification bell. I hope you all have a great week. I'll see you next time.